Welcome to Nowstalgia Ranks. We're back. And Dave, my trusty co-host, is here to rank along with me, Pat Sheehan, the other co-host of this podcast, the discography of The Weeknd, an artist that we have talked about a few times over the course of the podcast life, going a little bit more in depth on some albums that we have not had a chance to review based on the fact that we were not even a podcast when a lot of these came out. So I'm excited to get to that. But Dave, just wanted to kind of start off to see like how you're doing today. Are you ready to talk about Abel?
Yeah, very exciting. He's obviously been around, been very mainstream for such a long time, but that also means there's a lot of things to discuss. He has quite the deep catalog, and it is interesting to think about the various eras, the various iterations of The Weeknd, because there are a few. But also, there's no better time to discuss him than now. He is one of, if not the very biggest pop star we have right now. Right now, he's, I think, number 3 on Spotify monthly listeners, over 75 million right now, just in several months off his last album, and just 2 years not even removed from a Super Bowl halftime show performance, about to embark on his first stadium tour. Like, he's at the absolute peak of his powers, so why not discuss the run to this point?
Yeah, we just talked about Dawn FM. It came out back in January, February now. Man, the year
January,
seems to
like
be flying
second
by.
week of January.
And obviously before that, reviewed After Hours, an album that I think we'll get into some of the I don't know if it's controversy necessary, but some of the things that happened regarding the album afterwards, and specifically regarding how it was received or lauded by critics and by certain award ceremonies. But I think you summed it up pretty well. Abel Tesfaye goes from being this kind of like I don't even know like how to describe it, almost like a
Yep.
folklore type person when he first dropped these mixtapes on the internet, to being the biggest pop star in the world. Amazing trajectory of his career for sure.
Yeah, well, I think the parallel between him and his other fellow superstar from Toronto, Drake, is that their paths to superstardom are very different, even though they are linked. No one knew who The Weeknd was when it really started getting going. He was kind of keeping anonymous, and he also wasn't really performing, which I think is probably the most interesting thing of all. But also, The Weeknd wasn't an actor on Degrassi before he became a rapper like Drake. The Weeknd was fucking homeless, and doing a lot of drugs and really having a tough time. Right around the time he started, kicking off his music career in like 09, 2010 time. That's very different. And honestly, the reason he got on people's radar, and I came into him a little later than this, but the reason he got onto people's radar was because of Drake just kind of posting his music on the OVO blog, and as a fellow Toronto artist, and that led to it getting picked up elsewhere, like on Pitchfork, and then next thing you know, the internet buzz is ablaze, and House of Balloons comes out in March 2011. But it was a very anonymous and old school rise, to be honest.
Yeah, and before we go into talking about House of Balloons, that first mixtape you mentioned, you talked about how you kind of came to it a little bit later. When did you first start listening to Weekend? Do you remember?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I was aware of all the trilogy mixtape run throughout 2011. I was aware of that. I was aware of the internet love, because at that time Drake was really big, on The Weeknd, bigging him up. OVOXO was a huge thing. You can look up all the Drake tweets; they're still there. I was aware of that, and then I think though I didn't really listen to it all that much until I heard The Weeknd featured on Crew Love on Take Care, Drake's second album, and then that obviously was a huge cosign, a huge moment for him, and kind of pointed me back. Just because like I'm not like the biggest R&B fan, so I wasn't necessarily looking for hot new genre changing R&B music the way people were talking about his mixtapes. but I was definitely aware of it. Just I think really because of the Drake orbit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have like very distinct memories of sitting in Newhall at Siena College, like listening to some of the tracks off of Trilogy, which I wasn't tuned into the mixtape drops back in 11, but Trilogy when they released the whole thing in 2012, probably I was listening to this like early 2013 maybe.
Hmm.
I remember listening to a few of the tracks and just like immediately being like, wow, especially House of Blues, which we're going to talk about in a second. Just some of those tracks are just so unique sounding, especially
Hmm.
for the time, and it just immediately grabs you when you listen to it. So I remember listening to it then, but in thinking about my fandom of the weekend, I'm trying. I mean, I really had a fall off there. I think I really wasn't super big fan through the like Beauty Behind the Madness, like Come Up and whatnot. I think I really started
Hmm.
getting back into him as we started doing the podcast, and I was like, well, this feels like a bit of a blind spot. I should probably be a little bit more tuned into this artist who just seems to be kind of popping up more and more. And obviously, as we talked about some of the more recent albums, it made more sense to really be listening to him. Also, because the music just was leveling up after a bit of a lull. So
Hmm.
we'll go a little bit more in depth with it. But yeah, talk to me about your first time listening to House of Balloons, the mixtape. Did you listen to it in and of itself, or was it part of the trilogy for you?
Right. Yeah. So he released House of Balloons March 11, Thursday, August 11, Echoes of Silence, December 11. And then it gets remixed and remastered and re-released as Trilogy in November 2012 after he had signed to Republic. I think it was the re-release that I listened to. And obviously that's pre-Spotify. You had to buy that or
I did.
find that. And that's how I listened to it. But yeah, it's definitely the end of 2011 time at the earliest, just because it had to have been after Take Care, and Take Care was the end of 2011 as well before Echoes came out. So, um, and then it wasn't really too long after where he started having more features in hip hop. He was on the Wiz album. Obviously, it was all over Take Care, And then the lead up to Kissland ultimately didn't land the way it should have, but the weekend featuring was starting to pop up, and again, all the Drake orbit before they started to have like a bit of a cold war. So, yeah, it had to be sometime around the re-release, I think.
So yeah, Dave, you mentioned that you were kind of tuning into the weekend around 2011, probably listening to it in the compilation. Do you remember like what your reaction was listening to these mixtapes for the first time?
Yeah, it's just definitely different. It just stood out for being something new, R&B, but not Chris Brown, not Trey Songz, not the other contemporaries of the 2010s R&B scene. Kind of different from R&B now, where we're really driven by a bunch of female stars right these days. Back then, kind of a different time, but the weekend was rapidly changing the time, just the way Drake was rapidly changing how hip hop and greater pop music was moving too. And even though the weekend was not yet a pop force, it wasn't long before the R&B influence was heard everywhere else. So yeah, I think I was just taken with just how out there it felt, but in a good way. Obviously, the explicit nature of his lyricism also is obvious standout because it's very easy to notice.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the other like artists during that time, Trey Songs, Chris Brown, and the songs that kind of come to mind when you think about R&B from that time are these like really like kind of cheesy, tuned up like love songs, and then you turn on you House of Balloons, and you have High for this as the first track with this like creepy, eerie like 30-second lead in, and then this very like desolate sounding beat, and this crooner just kind of singing at this high pitch, and you're like, oh, this is something different. And like you talked about, like the lyrics, the subject matter for these,
Mm,
definitely a bit more adult than a lot of those like more pop sounding R&B songs were. And yeah, I think that's the reaction a lot of people have listening to this for the first time. Is this is not what R&B was during this time, but it was a really welcome change, I think.
right. Yeah, then I mean, let's not forget that it wasn't soon before Frank Ocean is also pushing R&B in another direction as well. So you're really at an
Mm.
inflection point with The Weeknd and Frank, I think, coming out around the same time, and Drake as well. But yeah, I mean, House of Balloons still really holds up to this day. I think there's really no argument about it. I had it on my best albums of the 2010s list. Go check that out, youtube.com/nostalgia pod. It's just a really seminal piece of work, but also really fun to pick out songs from. There's a lot of really memorable stuff. Lest we forget, The Weeknd played was it Glass Table Girls during the Super Bowl set, if I remember right.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. I mean, he didn't play any Kissland tracks. He didn't play anything from the other two tapes, but he made room for House of Balloons, even though honestly, probably most of his fans, because he's so famous now, probably never even listened to this, to be honest. But hey, it's there when you want it. Obviously, Spotify has
Yeah.
made things so easier. It didn't used to be quite as accessible, um, but now it is. And I mean, I think just songs like you mentioned, "High" for this really kicking off well. But I think Glass Table Girls, The Morning, back to back, Wicked Games, and then The Party and the After Party. You're just getting a lot of memorable samples, but
Yeah.
just a lot of like classic textbook first era Weekend from the lyrics.
Yeah, you mentioned Wicked Games is one of them. I think Wicked Games is a clear standout listening back, and it's funny because I feel like if you, depending on the day you kind of catch it, you could be looking for something different on this. Like House of Balloons, Glass Table Girls is probably the track I come back to as probably my favorite Weekend track to this point. And that's obviously including some of the
Mhm.
more recent albums that where we loved a lot of the tracks off it, but that flip in the middle and just like how it really it embodies this feeling of this like night out, this coked out like night where it just kind of drags on forever. I mean, it's like almost an 8-minute song. And then you kind of go to the morning as the next track, and it's like such a more upbeat sounding track and really feels almost like
Mhm.
the sun's coming out after this like night out. And I think that's the thing that I really appreciate about the Weekend and listening through the discography, working through it for this podcast. You just kind of appreciate how he goes into almost all of these albums, or at least the ones that really hit, with this conception of what he really wants them to sound like, what he's trying to convey, how he wants you to feel listening to them. And the albums that I think are best are the ones where he goes in with something that he's trying to get across.
Mhm.
The ones where he doesn't necessarily hit as much are a bit more. It seemed a little bit less concise to me in
Yeah,
that
yeah, I
aspect.
agree.
But
Yeah. I mean, also
why
shout
don't
out the
we?
Happy House sample on Glass
Yeah,
Table Girls, really
oh,
choice, obviously.
Susie and the Banshees, and you also get a Beach House sample on at the party and the after party.
Correct. Yeah,
Really, really choice shit right there. So
totally.
he mentioned that just a short 6 months later, 5 months later, we get Thursday, the next mixtape, and wouldn't say it is as seminal as um, House of Balloons is, but I do think that it's a nice like follow up because I don't know if I would say that there's any like bad songs on any of these three mixtapes, but there's definitely some where I don't know if what he was going for totally worked for me,
Mhm.
or if they necessarily hit the same way that a lot of the ones from House of Balloons do. Did you feel the same way about Thursday?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's consensus that House of Balloons is the best of the three. And I think more than anything, admiration for this time is really admiration for this whole run, this whole year that the weekend had, and also the excitement that was accompanying it because he was such an unknown and was not and was keeping that identity more or less unknown as well. I think all of that kind of boils into like, oh yeah, he drops three mixtapes in less than a year, and all of a sudden he's all over the Drake album too, and like we don't really even know who this guy is. Like that, the whole year, the 2011 for the weekend is just so big that I think that's kind of where all the admiration goes. And if you try to like piecemeal out, it's like yeah, like Thursday. I love the cover, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think there's just a few less songs to take away. Is all. I really my favorite song off this is "Life at the Party" track two, but I think the Birds part one and two also have some memorable moments. And then also was it Heaven or Las Vegas, the last track has like guitars for the first time on any of his music.
Yeah, in listening to this one, I think that those first couple songs stand out a lot more than the last like two or three do. Rolling Stone didn't really hit for me, and Heaven or Las Vegas, while the guitars definitely sounded different, I also didn't really vibe with that one as well. I agree. Life of the Party, just that the production on that is so like menacing and then like worrying. It's really impressive, and I also really liked the Zone and the Birds Part Two off this one. But yeah, that just kind of keeping that same like druggy, narcotic filled, sex filled themes kind of going, and definitely feels like a pure follow up to this. For you, was there like one track that you like when it came on, you were like, oh, I don't know if this one really fits for what the weekend was going for on
Ah,
these.
yeah. I don't know if anything comes to mind. Why? Did you have something specific?
I think for me, it's kind of the Birds Part One. While I don't
Mm,
hate the song, it has that like marching band, on
yes, it's
it,
very
kind of,
noticeable.
and it just is so like ooh, that just feels so out of nowhere. Maybe a little reminiscent of some things to come on some other albums. But why don't we keep it moving and finish up the mixtapes? Move on to Echoes of Silence, which, well, as you already kind of mentioned, dropped in December of 2011.
Yeah.
I think we're like right near the end of the year, and um,
Yep. December
yeah, Echoes of
21st,
Silence.
like a
Yeah,
month after Take Care. I think that's the most important thing. This is the first post Take Care weekend drop.
people were aware and were looking for some weekend stuff. Do you feel like Echoes of Silence delivered?
Yeah, I think it's my least favorite of the three, but it's like not for lack of trying. I like my favorite track of this is Imitation,
Hmm.
and I think The Fall is pretty memorable. That's kind of like an early like motif for this weekend era. We'll reference that later. Um, I like Same Old Song, even though the Juicy J part's kind of random. And then of course track
Yeah.
one is just a Dirty Diana Michael Jackson cover, lest we forget the Michael Jackson comparisons were not starting with Beauty Behind the Madness and Can't Feel My Face, but much sooner, in fact.
Yeah, listening in totality, I think this is a nice listen, but I think the tracks definitely aren't as strong as the first two for me. Although I do like Montreal a lot off this. I also like EXO the host. Yeah, but I don't know if I would say I dislike any of these. Echoes of Silence, the final track, might be the one I'm just kind of like, well, I'm ready to like turn this off by now because it's a
Yeah.
little like slow and he's really going for something there. But overall, like, don't hate it. And have you ever listened to Trilogy straight through? Have you listened to like the 3 hours of it all?
No,
It's just,
obviously not.
yeah,
It's too long.
it's so long, but like I feel like if you like really sat down, like engage with it, there's probably something more to like these how
Yeah.
these three albums interplay together. It's a lot to
I'm sure it fits well as like a shuffled playlist, you know,
yeah.
to be honest. But no, I would never subject myself to such a long listen, no matter who it is.
Yeah, and as you know, in this day and age, the shorter the better for us. So, um, any last thoughts on these three mixtapes? Are you ready to get into the albums?
Now we can go to the albums. I think this is a really important time. So his debut album Kissland comes out in September 2013. However, that's still almost 2 years from when Echoes comes out at the end of 2011. As I said, the weekend's all over Take Care. Feature on Crew Love as well as the co-write. Then there's also four other songs that the weekend has co-writing credits on. So five songs total. Those songs that were on Take Care, Drake basically took from the weekend. Those were the weekend tracks that he had been made for House of Balloons and the other tapes, really House of Balloons. And uh, the weekend was happy to give them to Drake, and Drake really increased the weekend's profile. So, all things considered, I don't think they would change anything. However, the OVO EXO thing, Drake tried to sign the weekend to OVO. EXO did exist when all the mixtapes got released as just like a brand that the weekend had created with some Toronto music executives. However, the weekend didn't sign with Drake, most famously. He signed with Republic Records in the end of 2012. EXO becomes an official label imprint of Republic, and then Trilogy gets re-released and remastered under Republic in end of 2012. And at this point, like I remember this happening, and it's like the Weekend spurns Drake, Toronto beef, and they never actually beefed about anything, and any potential hatchet has long since been buried. For we can point at the times when that happened, but it was just very interesting to see how all that went down, because Drake really wanted this, and it's really funny to see how this didn't happen because the OVO boot camp stuff that would come with artists like Majid Jordan and McCone and other people signed to OVO. The Weekend, whether he lucked out, whether he took his career into his own hands, however it really went down, he was able to eventually rival Drake and in certain senses surpass him on the global stage. And this is really when that starts. The funny thing about it, of course, is that his debut album, September 2013, is Kissland. And despite positive reception at the time, nobody fucking likes Kissland.
Yeah, Kissland, it's hard to say because I think in general, as an album, it's solid. Like it's fine. I don't know if there's any tracks on here that I'm like, oh, that's just really terrible. But I'm also like,
Hmm.
there's not many tracks that really pop off and really grab you. And there's a couple. Like I believe it's like it might be on Adaptation or Belong to the World. I can't remember exactly, but there's some where you really hear like why he was getting these Michael Jackson comparisons because he's really pitching his voice up at times. He's kind of going for these like little like sounds that really like harken back to Michael, and it felt like in
Yeah.
some way he was kind of trying to like welcome those, which it's there are worse things than to align yourself with Michael Jackson as a vocalist. But the songs just weren't there on this, and obviously better times ahead. But yeah, just a fine first album, but really not what he was hoping for after these mixtapes really popped off and grabbed so much attention. Um, I heard that you said no one likes this, so I'm guessing there's not really much on here that feels worth talking to you about for
No,
you.
especially in totality of the Weekend's career. But I remember at the time, people just weren't really vibing with it because, like you said, just the songs aren't there. Yeah, you can put it on. It's not dog shit by no means, but it's just like, when would you ever want to listen to Kissland tracks compared to anything else he's made? Never, However, notable, Drake is featured on Kissland on the song
Live
"Live
for.
For." And at the time, you can go check it out, listen to the clip of Drake talking to Elliot Wilson. No beef. They did not have beef, even if things got a little cold between them around this time. But it's just funny because, like, I think Drake was probably at the time really laughing because it's like, man, you didn't do it.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and this album, actually, notably, it didn't go number one. You would have thought the Weekend was already becoming a huge star, but actually it didn't. This went number two, 96,000 first week, and the trilogy re-release, I should say, did 86,000 first week, number four. So the Weekend had a big profile at this point, post to Take Care run, but he still wasn't truly the superstar yet. That would take until Beauty, obviously.
yeah. I mean, as of our recording, every album from him has gone platinum except for this one. This one's still only gold and silver, depending on
Which tells
the
you that no one's streaming it.
Yep. So people aren't coming back to this one. People aren't finding it, and like we said, the songs just aren't there. But then just a few years later, yeah, I think this is where you can say like the breakthrough really happens into more
Right.
mainstream for the Weekend with Beauty Behind the Madness.
Yeah, so Beauty Behind the Madness comes out in August 2015. I would really put the breakout though the year prior, 2014, basically the year between Kissland and Beauty. I think that is the true like Weekend ascent, and the anticipation for Beauty is manifested in like those first week sales where he does 412,000 first week with Beauty, his first number one. But the buildup really started with 2014. You can just like listen to this run that he has here, just like throughout the course of 2014. He releases the Drunken Love Beyonce remix from like it's
Mhm.
like the male perspective of Drunken Love. He does that. He hops on Ariana Grande's second album, "Love Me Harder." Huge track, really a big moment for Ariana. I think getting her into more explicit material there. He releases the promotional single King of the Fall, which really gets the hype and anticipation going for uh, Beauty. King of the Fall, a non-album track, but still a track better than anything on Kissland. Like really get people hyped. Uh, I think one perhaps a bit unremarked, but one of my favorite moments of this time is the Or Nah remix from The Weeknd, Ty Dolla Sign song featuring Wiz Khalifa, and you have The Weeknd doing the remix where it's like perhaps the most explicit R-rated shit he's ever said. The song's incredible. Uh, two more things here. The least famous of them all because it's non-streaming. He releases a cover of R. Kelly's Down Low, performs it live at this time. It doesn't actually get released in full until 2017 when Drake does it on OVO Sound Radio. Check this out on YouTube. The Weeknd covering R. Kelly's Down Low. It's incredible. And then, of course, at the very end of the year, December 2014, he releases Earned It off the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack, a song that would win him
That's
a Grammy and became a monster hit.
yep.
2014 was this crazy year for The Weeknd. And then Beauty, you could see it in those first week record sales. The hype was just so high for that album.
Yeah, and you first of all, earned it is really I think the moment where it's like, okay, he's really like gone up a level in terms of fandom, in terms of just star power in general. Getting even say what you want about 50 Shades of Grey, it was a bit of a phenomenon at that time. The book bestseller,
Mhm.
very much in the zeitgeist, and the movie was highly anticipated, even if those movies ended up being absolute crap. Um, you know, this album drops end of the summer, August 28th, 2015, and he headlines or is a second row headliner at Lollapalooza that summer as well. So really,
Mhm.
kind of getting that like he is arisen. His star is on the up and up at this point, and then we finally get Beauty Behind the Madness. And Dave, I mean, looking back at it now, do you feel like this album holds up? What was it like listening back to it?
Yeah, so I really dug the album at the time, and I have a lot of songs on it that I do really enjoy. I think there's a really strong 6 songs on this album.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's buoyed by two of the biggest hits of his career, The Hills and Can't Feel My Face. His first 2 songs to go number one. They didn't debut there, but his first songs to make it to number one. And I mean, now The Hills is what, almost 1.5 billion on Spotify. I think that's like top 70 all time and he has higher songs, but like this is those songs right there. It's like he was all over the radio following up Earned It, which was there as well. And that being said, I think like the lead single though, Often, which is it's another very explicit sex jam from Abel, but that really got people going because it's like fuck, now this is some early Weekend. This is House of the Blues. This ain't Kissland, you know. And on the deep cut side of things, I really enjoy Real Life a lot. I love his performance on that. I always liked Losers. I really like Tell Your Friends. I think it's a really strong record with some deep cuts on it, even if overall it's a little long. But I think that core 6 right there is really tight.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was dropping hour-long mixtapes, so the albums didn't really get cut down much, and that I think is a bit of a trademark for the weekend, right? Is
Mm.
in a generation when music was increasingly moving towards shorter songs and shorter tracks, he was like, "No, I make 5 to 7 minute tracks exclusive. That's it, and I'll make a 3 minute banger here and there." But he for a while he was just like unrelenting in terms of the length of a lot of these songs. But yeah, no, I think I think the way you described it is perfect. I don't. There's a lot of songs of this I'm not gonna ever go back to, but
Oh,
the
I
ones that
agree.
do hit really, really hit, and it's just like unbelievable to listen to. Like you said, "Can't Feel My Face" and "The Hills" are obviously the highlights, but "Acquainted" stands out to me. That was, I think, one of the singles, one of the last singles off of this.
Hmm.
Often you mentioned is a really good one. "Tell Your Friends" I really like. Yeah, well, what other songs off this did you like? What
Well,
rounded out the
yeah,
six?
yeah. I think that run in the start, Real Life, Losers, Tell Your Friends, Off in the Hills, Acquainted, Can't Feel My Face. Like that's really good. And then you still have Earned It later. Um, Ed Sheeran and Lana songs. I honestly I forgot those songs existed. To be honest, I had no memory of those because I like the other songs so much.
Yeah, it was really funny. Like listening through, and I wasn't really like checking out the title of the songs I was going through. They hear Ed Sheeran pop up, and I was like, what? Like, just totally caught me off guard. I actually didn't totally hate Lana on it, but I just was like, it's just unnecessary,
Yeah.
you know?
I'd be honest, like Lana Del Rey and The Weeknd should have some better songs together because they really
Absolutely.
are like two peas in a pod, aesthetically, sonically, lyrically. It all would make sense. They just don't really have that like signature collab to this point. It's probably a missed opportunity.
No, I completely agree. And just to turn it back around to the album just a little bit more, what I really appreciate about this, and I think you touched on this, but I just wanted to kind of hammer home, is that there still is a lot of the DNA of who the Weekend was when he first broke out on this. And even though he's making this push for more mainstream appeal at this point, and you can kind of tell from like the 50 Shades of Grey song earned it, like you mentioned, and just some of the production on these songs, it still very much feels House of Balloons. Abel is still there, but we're going to be moving into some, some albums where it feels like he gets a little bit away from some of this. So I think that's one of the things I admire most about this is his ability to really um, still remain true to a lot of what he originally wanted to be, while still making music that was just more palatable for larger audiences. So, any
Right.
last thoughts on this? Or are you ready to move on?
This album was nominated for Album of the Year, and it did win Best Urban Contemporary Album at the Grammys. Earned It had won a few things as well, and then he won Best Urban Contemporary Album a second time for the next album, album three, Starboy.
November 25th, 2016, it dropped. And this is what I was alluding to with feeling like he loses himself a little bit in terms of like the mainstream push. And Starboy, I think, has some songs that are worthy of coming back to, but I feel like it also has a lot of stuff that just does not feel like it fits into the overall weekend discography. And, just listening to it just feels way too poppy, way too like glitzy in the wrong ways. We're gonna be talking about glitzy in the right ways for the weekend, I think, in a little bit. And just overall,
Mhm.
like not really my favorite stuff from him. But on listening back, did you have the same response, or were you a little bit surprised?
Yeah, I think as a record, it's definitely his like least cohesive or least interesting as an album. There's still some big tracks here, so there's still some fun deep cuts on here. But
Hmm.
as we said, he doesn't cut down the track list, and it really I think shows on Starboy. There's just a lot of fat on this one, and in this case, because the music's a little less interesting, because this is his like at his most overtly pop leaning sound, the bloat is like more noticeable than it was even on something like Beauty. So I like some of the tracks. I think obviously the Daft Punk uh, collaborations are notable and cool, and the fact that Daft Punk would actually make music with him at all is like really awesome cosign to see for someone. Like obviously there are tons of famous artists that would have loved to make music with Daft Punk, and Daft Punk didn't couldn't care less, but they made music with The Weeknd. And even though I don't think the album kind of lives up to that hype, on the other hand, Starboy, the 20th most streamed song on Spotify, it's a monster track nonetheless. It's just probably not the most interesting big hit he has.
Definitely not, but still, I think the Daft Punk produced ones really stand out on this. Starboy and Feel It Coming, which anchor the album start to finish. I think are definitely the two of the tracks that uh, pop most to me on this. But you mentioned that you had a couple of deep cuts on here and some other highlights. So
Hmm.
what really stood out for you in terms of the tracks you liked?
Yeah. So I'd just say like I like Attention, I like Lonely Night, but the three other songs I think are most worth going back to. I think Party Monster is a lot of fun. It's like sonically, it's like super poppy, but I think lyrically, it's still like old school Weekend. And then I've always enjoyed Reminder, just because that's like a Weekend hip hop song. He made the music video. In that music video, there's tons of rapper cameos, including Drake. Another sign that they didn't have any beef. Um, then you have Sidewalks, which is another hit. It's a fun song. I think the Weekend performance is good, and the Kendrick verse is very funny because it's a bit of a meme. It's like Kendrick, maybe rapping about sex is not your forte, maybe don't do that. But overall, I still like the song.
Yeah, I have to say those are some of the least like I don't know, offensive isn't the right word, but least like disliked tracks for me. In between Party Monster and Reminder though is False Alarm, which I think is just terrible. Really, some of his like probably least interesting and most like blah work he's done on this. Also, you get a song with Future later on, which
Hmm.
I didn't really hate until Future came on. Then I just skipped to the next track. Just something about it just didn't mesh well for me. Um, but yeah, just not many songs really popped off on this one too much for me. I mean, it feels like he was. I don't really know. Like I think he probably was approached or was able to like get some sort of collaboration with Daft Punk, and then just really leaned into this. I mean, there's a lot of like Doc McKinney production
Mm.
on this, which maybe that was it. He was just like working with producers at that time that weren't really inspiring him in the right way. But yeah, not a lot of songs that really stay with me from this one.
Right. Yeah, and again, I think that's okay when you've made as much music as you have. You're inevitably going to let some people down, but I think it was really just a testament to his star power that even like an album like this that disappoints creatively still has these massive hits and these massive highs and songs that will always be on his set list when he performs. So by no means a failure. But I think this is
Uh,
kind of an interesting moment too, because this leads us to his only like EP release since he became a star, which is My Dear Melancholy, which came out in March 2018. And this, I think, was another kind of like mini inflection point for true Weekend fans because it reestablished people's faith in what kind of music the Weekend's going to make, much how like King of the Fall's promotional single got the distaste of Kissland out of people's mouths and hype for Beauty Behind the Madness established. In this case, My Dear Melancholy, it's a brief EP. It's a fine EP. There's definitely some memorable songs on it, but most importantly, lyrically, sonically, it reminds you once again of House of Balloons' era of the weekend, and doesn't sound anything like Starboy. Most importantly, and that just
yeah,
got people hyped. And you listen to it a little more, and you have was it Wasted Times? Is it the song that's kind of interpolating Selena Gomez lyrics to speak about his relationship with Selena Gomez, and of course the other songs, some references to Bella Hadid. It's like, oh no, the Weeknd's back on his savage shit with this. This is exactly what we want.
yeah, and I think working with some really choice production on this too. Talking about how maybe the ones on Starboy weren't as interesting. He does a couple of tracks here with Gestaffelstein, which
Yeah.
just those are probably the two most memorable songs to me. I was never there and Hurt You right in the middle. I mean, when I was never there comes on, it has that like siren like
Hmm.
right at the beginning. You're like, ooh, this is really some House of Balloon shit right here. Like that, it fits perfectly with his vibe. And then Hurt You, it feels like a bridge almost between like the After Hours weekend and that House of Balloons weekend because it has a little bit of that like more poppy production but still dark and
Hmm.
like toned back, which is nice.
Totally. And obviously that sets the stage for his feature of Lost in the Fire, the Gustaffelstein single that came out a year later, a song that I like so much that it kind of colored my reception to the Weekend's performance off the Swedish House Mafia song "Moth Through a Flame," which came out at the end of 2021. It's like, no, you've already kind of, I think, hit your apex with working with DJs between Daft Punk and Gustaffelstein. I don't think you gotta keep doing this because I don't know if you can hit these highs once again. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
for like a again for like a taster for the next era of your career, My Dear Melancholy is such a big success because it did exactly what it needed to do, which is shift fans' attention and reorient their thoughts about where he's going with his creative direction. So between this and the King of the Fall promotional single, it's like just two really smart moments in terms of like where he like signals how he's shifting his career. And of course, this leads us to After Hours, which everyone's aware with because it was just an absolutely massive record.
Yeah. After Hours. I mean, we've talked about it. Check out our original review, youtube.com/nostalgia pod. Stay plug in. But yeah, After Hours remains probably one of my favorite albums of this decade so far. I mean, we're
Hmm.
3 years into it, and
It was both of our number ones of
yep,
2020. Check out that.
it's undeniable. I mean, even just like listening through again, there's barely a skip, if any, on the
Yeah.
album, and it just like it has so many moments, and it kind of just keeps you on the hook over and over again. That you find something new almost every single time you listen through it.
Totally. And I think the sequencing on After Hours is just so noticeable. Something that will continue with Dawn FM, where it's like it just sounds so good to listen to front to back that even if there are moments where it's like, oh yeah, well I kind of like the other song more than this, it doesn't matter because the whole thing just sounds so precise and like that intentionality is just so exciting because it's such a far cry from what he was really doing on Starboy, which just didn't have that kind of cohesion. But After Hours, I mean, it really is the kind of union of the two lanes of the Weekend's career, the Weekend's sound. You have the subject matter and the uh, intentionality of all of mixtape era Weekend, House of Balloons Weekend, but you still have the pop appeal and the broad, mainstream leaning sound of Beauty. And he actually was able to manage both of these things without sacrificing for either of them. And that's, I think, why it was so successful, because it can please both parties. It can please the casual fan, and it can please like the hardcore fan of the Weekend who had been with him for 10 years to that point. And I mean, there's just so many fucking tracks on this.
So many tracks. Just even like looking at it and scrolling through again, I'm like, oh yeah, I really love that song. I like Snow Child is just excellent.
Give her
Just
Philip K.
excellent.
Dick.
um, but then you have probably one of my favorite on this, which is obviously In Your Eyes, but Save Your Tears back to back.
Yeah.
Um, Earlier on, you get Heartless and Faith. I mean, Faith is
Faith is
really a
my fucking
standout.
jam still. The kick
Yeah.
drum on that when the hook starts. If I OD, I want you to OD right beside me. Just a classic Weekend line too, but the beat's fucking
Mhm.
incredible.
And, something we haven't really talked about too much is just like his appearance, right? It's always been kind of distinct. The hairstyles have always been
Right.
really singular. I remember when he first kind of was breaking out, how there was like talk about how he's maybe not like your traditional like front man. He was a bit more reserved. He had this
Right.
like withdrawn personality. Even like when he first came up, a little bit like on the chubbier side for what we would traditionally consider like a R&B artist at that time, Chris Brown showing off the abs, Usher showing off the abs all the time. And I feel like on this album, not only did he really blend that persona and that artist that he was from House of Balloons, and that he truly, I think, is underneath all this, but with the pop appeal that he wants to be able to have and to get his music out there. But he also, I think, really found something in terms of how he presents himself physically. He really leans into the Fear and Loathing vibe with this, kind of mimicking some of that on the music videos. He kind of uses that like dark underbelly of Las Vegas to like
Mm.
anchor all the promotion around this, and it just fits so perfectly, and it's all so memorable. And I just really impressed, like, going back to that like singular idea that he had on like House of Balloons and what he was trying to do on a lot of these records. This is just a fully formed idea from start to finish, and he executed it perfectly, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
totally. And then he was rewarded for it. Blinding Lights
Mhm.
setting the record in the top 10 Billboard Hot 100 for an entire year, remained on the chart for 90 weeks straight. Crazy record. It is the second most streamed song on Spotify, approaching 3 billion. It'll probably pass Shape of You and become the most streamed song on Spotify.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just kind of wild how long the run was for Blinding Lights. Perhaps that's pandemic aided. Came out right as pandemics. Actually, no, it was released as a single before the pandemic. The album comes out right as the pandemic starting, and then
TikTok aided though for sure.
yeah, and then it just remained.
Mhm.
Just like how Dua remained for like the same run too. They both released at that time, and um, obviously, I think most people think the song's played out and don't really want to listen to it these days. But it's just an amazing success story, and it's a really good song. Obviously,
Yeah, I completely agree. It's it's kind of funny. to think about, right? Because uh as we're recording this, it's in 2022. We're now in the endemic stage of the COVID-19 pandemic, but this very much felt like part of the soundtrack of like early pandemic because it was all over TikTok. It was a huge trend. The weekend is literally being anointed everywhere, becoming the most popular artist in the world. And the Grammys are like, nah, bro, this ain't good enough for us. We don't want to recognize this. We don't want to give you your shine. It's just like, we talked recently about how the Grammys, have, the show this year moved in the right direction. Some nice choices in terms of who won. This is probably still one of the biggest black marks that they'll ever have. This record not getting any recognition.
Yeah, well, it just doesn't make any sense. First off, they had rewarded and nominated The Weeknd before we had mentioned that. He had won Grammys to this point. But it just felt so weird that, like, why isn't After Hours getting any love? Like, I know the Grammys are a bit of like an artsy group, that's just the membership. That's how it works. And doesn't mean it has to win, but it was just such a surprising omission to not be nominated. It's not that the Grammys need to be like the MTV Music Awards. Blinding Lights being super big doesn't mean it needs to be nominated. That's not how it works. But critically, the love was also there. So what's missing? And obviously the Grammys talked about their the secret nominating committees are no more, things like that. But The Weeknd has said he does not want to be submitted for Grammys moving forward. We'll see what happens when Dawn FM is up for the Grammys in 2023, if he still holds that, because he assumingly would be up for more Grammys once again. TBD there, but just a really unforced error on the Grammys part. It just doesn't really make much sense because there was just so much critical love for this record.
It doesn't make any sense. It's seriously black mark in my opinion. But to kind of get back to the album and what made it successful, I mean, talked about the production choices on past albums. You got Max Martin all over this, man.
Yep.
I mean, you want to make a hit record, get Max Martin on it, but you also have Metro Boomin in a lot of places. Il Angelo, which is just a good producer name. So definitely, I think him working with some people that are more fitting for what he's trying to accomplish, seeing that success. All right, David. Then just recently we talked about Dawn FM dropping in January 2022. Again, talking about that physical appearance, looking like a haggard old man for the release of this and for the promotion of this. And only a few months removed. I mean, any new thoughts or any like lasting thoughts from Dawn FM for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we reviewed it extensively. Check that out, youtube.com/nostalgia pod. But it always felt so soon, so sudden, because even though After Hours had come out nearly 2 years prior, Blinding Lights had such a long tail, as we said, that didn't feel like a new Weekend album was needed. I mean, he just on the Super Bowl halftime show. Surely he would use a break, but no, the pandemic kept those creative juices going. And I think it's a really impressive record for its sonic cohesion. He is working with a lot of the same producers as Blinding Lights. The Max Martin team is here once again. And Dawn FM is not as overtly like poppy as some of the Blinding Lights hit or the After Hours hits are, but it's like really cohesive and still really has a impressive vision. So it's funny, like this album didn't actually debut at number one. It had no promotional cycle, which contributed to it, of course, no physical sales at launch. It did like 140 something first week. It actually just narrowly got edged out by Gunna, beating him for number one. And I feel like that kind of like notion is kind of carried on where a lot of these songs have been sticking around, like Sacrifice, most notably for me. But I think overall, like none of these songs have really taken off as like signature singular hits in on their own. But the overall album, Dawn FM, is still pretty impressive and interesting. I'm curious to see how the upcoming after hours the Dawn stadium tour that he's about to embark on, combining the two, a new idea for him. I'm curious to see how that works because this definitely feels like a end note in a certain sense to After Hours, but doesn't seem to have the individual songs that take away and revisit quite as much as After Hours does.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there with like the cohesion as an album is really impressive. Obviously, going for a more like '80s feel, there's certain tracks like you mentioned, like Sacrifice has that like distorted guitar, kind of reminds you of like Eye of the Tiger, some stuff like that, or like later on you get some uh really interesting, I think, choices. Like, um, I heard you were married. Just Little Wayne popping on that is like kind of a moment, but also like the track just also kind of similar to like the one with the future and forgot which album was Beauty Behind the Madness or whatever it
Right.
was,
Yep.
is just like, oh, okay, just popping up. I know where you also get a Tyler feature on this quick. But yeah, it's like really exploring that like pop 80s sound, and it does sound really good, but it doesn't reach the highs of After Hours for me. And I think it doesn't have the singular like song highs of Beauty Behind the Madness, but it's definitely gonna be interesting, like you said, to see how it plays out. Um, do you have like a song that listening back you really were like, ooh, that really is like
Hmm.
a track that I maybe overlooked last time?
I don't know about overlooked, but I really do enjoy "How Do I Make You Love Me." Like the hook on that is like really catchy, and it almost feels like easy for the weekend to make a song like that after we've heard After Hours. But I think it's still really nice.
Yeah, I think for me it's probably Is There Someone Else? It's got that like toned up sample in the beginning, and then it just sounds like the closest mix between his like older stuff and this new 80s sound he's exploring.
Right.
Um, Don't Break My Heart though is kind of interesting. It feels very like I don't know, like aerobics 80s kind of, but not my not my favorite, but it definitely caught my ear listening through. All right, why don't we get on to the rankings? That's enough talking about the career. We're gonna go from 9 to 1 because I guess we're gonna mention Melancholy on here, right? Which I just kind of put at the end, only because I
Hmm.
was like, it's not really an album, it's not a mixtape, it's just kind of like a few tracks. But
Yeah.
um, so I put that one at number 9. But just in terms of like actual quality, I think there's a lot of quality on that. And I want to say, I don't think any of these are like bad albums for me. But what do you have at number 9 for you?
Well, I have Kissland, obviously, because I don't like
Yeah,
any songs on Kissland.
Kissland is my number 8. So what's
Yeah.
your 8?
Yeah. So I think that's kind of obvious. I feel like the aggregate, if you pulled everyone, Kissland's gonna be at the bottom.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I have My Dear Melancholy a little further up. So for my 8 for me is Echoes of Silence, actually, and my 7 would be Thursday. Um,
Hmm.
and it's like I said, I feel like we have admiration for this run and the time. And I mentioned like the whole year of 2011 really for the weekend. It's like such a major thing. But if you take apart the individual albums, I feel like I actually obviously I like House Balloon so much more. And I just have these kind of at the bottom just because I feel like whether it's just really amazing highs on future releases or albums I really like a lot more, um, I actually end up having them towards the bottom, which, not that they're bad at all, but that's where they are.
Yeah, so I have Starboy at 7, and then I have Echoes of Silence and Thursday at 6 and 5, respectively.
Hmm.
And I see that you have the same thing.
Yeah.
Starboy is your number
Five.
5.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So we have
and
the same
so
grouping still.
yeah, I think it's important to talk about for me why I could did it that way. Starboy, as I mentioned in our breakdown of it, just feels like the least cohesive of any of the albums, and
Hmm.
the songs really don't last with you much beyond the Daft Punk ones, at least for me. So it just really felt like it couldn't go any higher than 7. Yeah, and Thursday Night Echoes of Silence, even though it doesn't reach the House of Balloons highs, I think it's still a more cohesive project, each one. And
Right.
obviously
Yeah.
putting
That's
it
very
together a
fair.
trilogy, I think buoys it a bit. So, what's in your B tier here? What would be your number 4?
Yeah. So 4 for me, I have My Dear Melancholy, just
Hmm.
because I think it's like, for what it is, it's like super effective. Like I said, the meta implications of getting the Starboy taste out of your mouth and getting you hyped for After Hours, totally successful. But I just really love how toxic he got on this because it was a return to form, a return to old school weekend. So that's why I have My Dear Melancholy at 4.
Yeah, my 4 was Beauty Behind the Madness. Um, I was really going back and forth between that and Dawn FM. I could probably still be talked into flipping them.
Hmm.
I think for me, I have Dawn FM at 3, a little bit higher than Beauty Behind the Madness, only because similar to the Starboy and then Echoes of Silence and Thursday rankings, I see Beauty Behind the Madness is a less cohesive album with higher
Yeah,
highs, and Dawn
very
FM is
fair.
just more cohesive sounding project. So, but yeah, though I think clearly our tiers are very similar.
Yep.
Having those two together.
Yeah. So then for me, I have Dawn FM 4, Beauty 3. And even though I think Dawn FM is a more cohesive record, I just like more of the cuts individually on Beauty. So I think it's really a question of like process and semantics of how you actually evaluate something, because that's clearly two sides of the coin. Is what do
Yeah,
you like to actually listen to, or what are you impressed with critically more? So it's, you can take in either direction, and we both did opposite directions there. Um,
yeah,
but I mean, I feel like the top four is pretty hard to argue with in some order,
completely
whatever order
agree.
you have.
Yeah, well, actually, I would say the top four is set in stone or very hard to argue with. But then I think the top two is kind of hard to argue to. But I think it's like,
Absolutely.
how are you going to like decide this? And we actually have a flip, which is nice. So I have House of Balloons at 2 and After Hours at 1. You have the opposite, right?
Yeah, and I struggle with this. I think over the months, over the years, I since After Hours has come out, I've like changed my like internal self opinion of this over time, and I think it's just one of those things where I mean, I put House of Balloons on my best albums of the decade, the 2010s. 2010s were already finished when I made that decision. It's like it's really a lofty exclamation. I feel like I kind of have to stick with it. But After Hours is such an impressive record for also giving you moments to take away, but also you know molding the two eras, as I said, of the weekend, the early stuff and the pop stuff, and it making both of them successful together. So uh, there's really no issue with having After Hours one, in my opinion. I feel like these are the clearly the two best things he's done.
Yeah, and again, I could probably be talked into flipping on this one as well. I just think After Hours is kind of his masterpiece, and that like elusive, like how do I make a fully formed album that is conceptually in line with who he is as an artist, but then also has the pop uh leanings and really just like captured the zeitgeist. And obviously what I think he'll be remembered for uh by the masses. But House of Balloons is like that low key, like it's like College Dropout versus My
Mm,
Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy
right,
kind of thing. It's
it's a
like
classic.
that. Yeah, it's a classic. So it can't really go wrong. And I think the takeaway is just like the Weeknd's a really good artist, man. Like
Yeah.
just plain to say, but couldn't be truer. He's excellent.
Yep. And if you're interested in other rankings, we talked about his Toronto contemporary Drake. We ranked that. Obviously, Drake has many albums to discuss as well, and his relationship to the weekend. So check out those rankings. We have rankings on Anderson Paak, Tyler the
Mhm.
Creator, Brockhampton, J. Cole, uh, as well as movie directors, Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson. I believe that's all our rankings, and more to come, of course. So make sure you subscribe.
And Kanye, dog.
Oh, of course. How could I forget? The most popular
uh,
of all of them.
yeah, yeah. Check those out. We'll be back next week with a regular show. But drop us your thoughts below. What's your number one weekend album? We'll talk to you soon.